So we have the book out, luckily, in both languages, and we have the author with us. Tengo un gran honor en presentarles hoy día una escritora magnífica, de profundidad y prosa poética, the amazing Ingrid Rojas Contreras. And I'll do the bio en español and the nota de la autora en inglés, so we get a little bit of both. Ingrid Rojas Contreras nació y pasó su infancia y parte de su adolescencia en Bogotá, Colombia. Su primera novela, La fruta del borrachero, obtuvo la medalla de plata en la categoría de ópera prima en los Book Awards de California y fue reconocida dentro del listado de libros recomendados del New York Times. Sus cuentos y ensayos han aparecido en la revista The New York Times, en The Believer, Zizeba, entre otras publicaciones. Reside en California. But I also want to read something from the author's note to The Man Who Could Move Clouds, because it was at this point that I knew that this was going to be a very, very exciting novel. Y lo encuentro. Primera página. ¿No? Está como there it is. This is a memoir of the ghostly, amnesia, hallucination, the historical specter of the past, which celebrates cultural understandings of truth that are at heart Colombianos. The stories in this memoir are the true lived experience of those who lived it as told to me. Just a little segment of her note. So it is memoir, but with profundidad muy mítica. It is rooted in the earth. It is rooted in the indigenous past. And I would like for those of you who have not had the great fortune of reading this book, for Ingrid to start by reading a section of it for you. En español, ¿verdad?
I'm going to start by reading in Spanish, and then I'll switch in English for you. And I'm just going to read from the beginning. Los secretos. Dicen que el accidente que me dejó con amnesia es mi herencia. No una casa, ni un terreno o un baúl de cartas, sino unas cuantas semanas de olvido. Mami también tuvo amnesia temporal, solo que ella tenía 8 años, mientras que yo 23. Ella cayó en un pozo seco y yo choqué en mi bicicleta contra la puerta de un carro que se abría. Mientras ella casi muere desangrada en Ocaña, Colombia, a oscuras, 10 metros bajo tierra, yo me puse en pie casi ilesa y vagué por las calles de Chicago en una tarde soleada de invierno. Mami no supo quién era durante 8 meses y yo pasé 8 semanas sin memoria alguna. Dicen que las amnesias eran la puerta que llevaba a esos dones que habríamos debido recibir, pero que Nono, mi abuelo materno, no nos había transmitido. Nono era curandero. Conocía secretos para hablar con los muertos, ver el futuro, aliviar a los enfermos y mover las nubes. Éramos una gente mestiza. Los europeos habían llegado al continente y allí habían violado a las indígenas, y ese era nuestro origen, ni indios ni españoles, sino una herida. En las montañas de Santander, los padres le habían pasado los secretos a los hijos, quienes les habían transmitido a sus hijos y estos a sus hijos, siempre entre varones. Pero Nono decía que todos sus niños le habían salido mujercitas, que les faltaba testículos para ser curanderos de verdad. Solo Mami, de carácter fuerte, sin miedo a nada, más hombre que muchos hombres ante los ojos de Nono, a quien él llamaba cariñosamente mi animal de monte, había podido recibir los dones. Pero Mami era mujer, y eso estaba prohibido. Se suponía que si una mujer tomaba posesión de los secretos, la desgracia no tardaría en llegar. We're just waiting for this, okay. Sin embargo, mientras mami, de 8 años, se recuperaba de las heridas después de caer en el pozo seco, no solo sus recuerdos iban volviendo a su memoria. También sucedió que de aquel lugar donde había ido a parar su mente, trajo con ella la capacidad de ver espíritus y oír voces incorpóreas. La familia decía que mami estaba destinada a recibir los secretos, y como no podía enseñárselos, le habían llegado directamente. 40 años después, cuando sufrí mi accidente y perdí la memoria, mi familia observó el evento con alborozo. Las tías se sirvieron sus bebidas y se dijeron una a la otra con aire festivo: aquí vamos otra vez, como la serpiente que se muerde la cola. Y luego se pusieron a esperar para ver cómo era que los secretos iban a manifestarse en mí. And then I'm going to switch to English. This is a story that happens in Spanish, where mami and the tías call each other vos, the archaic thou, but they use tú with me, the informal, tender you. Theirs is the way of speaking in Ocaña, where our family is from, and where language can sound like a colonial fossil. In Spanish, our stories are slow then fast, and we cackle constantly. Mami and I are spooked by the way our lives echo each other's, so we don't often discuss our amnesias, but increasingly, this is an itch I must scratch. I scrape and scald at its touch, only to want to probe into it again. The tías asked me to tell them what it was like to live without a memory. I focus on trying to communicate how surreal it was, how cinematic. The tías roll their eyes at me, but they do so while looking at one another like I am a bad television show they are watching and can safely comment on. Such a gringa, this one, no? What they really want to know is what I dreamt. For Mami and for me, during our bouts of amnesia, our waking lives were punctuated by a constant state of confusion, but our dreams were grounding. Mami's dreams were sequential, and in her dreams, she was a ghost. In mine, I had no body, and as I say this to the tías out loud, I realize I too believe I was a ghost. We have a word in Spanish for the walking of the dead, desandar, to unwalk. To walk until the walking is worn thin, to walk until the walking undoes even itself. That ghosts have a particular way of walking is an idea we inherited from the settlers who invaded the continent, but what is intrinsically ours is the sense of porosity, an understanding that we live between the real and unreal, and that often they are one and the same. So to us, the living go on ghost walks too. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing in both languages. It's such a metaphorical, it's a memoir, but it's metaphorical in a way that connects us with La Poesía del Pueblo. Very, very rooted in our indigenous roots and very rooted in the histories that have developed over centuries. Did you, while you were writing this, did you sense all of it flowing together, or did you kind of stop at certain moments and go and inhabit the other language? Just like in the Desandando, you know, you're walking and you're unwalking. Did you walk it forward in English and then hit a point at which you had to walk a different path?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. Something that I do when I'm writing is I try to think of the story in Spanish, and then I do this internal translation, and then I type it into English. And this goes back to when I first became a writer, I was working as an interpreter. So I was the person, you know, like in an interview where somebody might be speaking in Spanish, and then I was the person who was concurrently, you know, saying what they were saying in English, which I always loved how that felt in my brain, just this, transfusion from like one language to another. And I was constantly just haunted by all the things that are lost in translation. And as I became and I was writing and, writing, creative stories and fiction stories and writing the memoir, that being haunted by what is lost in translation then became como decías, como un tipo de poesía. It became like a sort of poetry. And I, like the other thing that I was thinking with this book is that memoir in the most traditional sense is made for people who have, what I say, like el privilegio del archivo, right? Like the privilege of the archive. And some of us are not from a people whose history has been kept. And for this book, like you read like that author's note had to do with that, and it was just came from my desire of wanting to expand what we say is what is allowed in nonfiction, and to say like some of us don't have we don't have records, we don't have written down histories, but we do have oral stories. And sometimes the way that we keep history is through ghost stories or art, like all of these other methods. And so I think I just wanted to make room for all of that. And, as much as possible, try to capture what is lost in translation via this kind of creative, transliterating the language myself as I was writing it.
But that dual path is also repeated. Es un metáforo, como cuando tú y tu mamá se ven como reflejos una de la otra.
Sí.
You echo each other's lives, and you look at each other and you wonder if it's a clone or if it's a mirror reflection that's reversed. And that expresses a duality that goes all the way through the book.
Sí, y tenemos hasta el mismo lunar, o sea, tenemos el mismo lunar que está acá en la espalda, pero el mío está como en el lado, ya ni me acuerdo, como en el lado izquierdo, creo. Es que como uno no se ve la espalda, uno no sabe. So it's like on the right or the left, but my mom has it the opposite. Y when we were traveling to Colombia, the people would often just mistake me for her. We met a lot of her childhood friends, including like a childhood boyfriend who was a demobilized guerrilla member. And the moment that he saw me, he just kind of entered into this shock because he almost felt like he was seeing her in the past, like it was her, and he was just so rattled by it. And that was so interesting to me because I felt like I was occupying como el lugar de ella, pero en el pasado, know?
Sí,
like
sí.
And so there is always this sense that we are living the same life, and, this idea that she had an accident and got amnesia. How strange it is that I also was in an accident and then got amnesia, right?
Yeah.
So, really in my life, like my life is stranger than anything that I could write in fiction.
Right. Es una magia y te prestas a esa magia. You follow it. I don't get the sense that, you're forcing the story to go in a particular direction, but you're more following it almost in a circular path that comes back around the way life does. Pasan cosas y uno se avanza en el tiempo y de pronto hay otro símbolo, hay otro sonido, el eco del pasado que nos lleva otra vez a experimentar ese momento, como lo del novio o amigo de ella que te la reconoció en ti,
sí,
en tu cara.
Casi se muere.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was thinking about circular storytelling a lot. In writing this book, I was doing so much just listening to my mother telling stories, and sometimes I would write it down or I would record her, and sometimes I would be doing the transcription of her telling stories, and I just started to notice the way that the shape of her stories and the craft of how she does it. Mm-hmm. And she often will start a fascinating story, and in the middle of that fascinating story, start an even more fascinating story. And so everything is just always beginning. And I was so moved by that, and I learned so much from that. And as I was writing the memoir, I just started to really take lessons from the way that she did it orally. I had so much fun just doing that circular shape in the book.
And every time she'd come back, she'd discover something new, something deeper, something that puts it in a different perspective. But isn't that the way we lead our lives? Continuamos pensando que tenemos la verdad, nos avanzamos y de pronto reconsideramos algo en la vida y le da más profundidad, como si uno está excavando. You're digging deeper each time. Each time you go forward, you're coming back and visiting, but adding more information. Se hace más completa la historia. Y eso es lo que sentí yo, que estábamos descubriendo la vida y el pasado y tu herencia y tu presente por descubrir cosas que nos urgían saber. ¿Por qué es que en escribir sobre la vida de uno tienes que saber lo que le pasó a tu abuelo?
Sí.
¿Verdad? You know, I mean, isn't that a little odd that you think, how do I know more about my life? Well, I have to find out. It's very important to find out what happened to this man and what were the details of his life, even though he died the year that I was born. I mean, you know, there's an irony to it, but it's an irony that we recognize as being very real. In that sense, I think it's been compared a lot to magical realism, except that magical realism is fiction, and this is nonfiction, magical realism. You know, the more we sense that something is strange, the more real it becomes.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing.
Yeah. I was just really thinking about what, like I feel like in a lot of Western storytelling, stories are individual to your life. You're sort of limited to what happened in your life. And the way that we tell stories in my family, you are a continuation of the stories that came before you. So if, for some reason, like, say that, one of my cousins became addicted to alcohol, then it would be like, oh, this is because your uncle was also addicted and your grandfather was also addicted. And it just becomes this very long story. Or, like an aunt who had an affair, like suddenly like all of the women who've had affairs are then brought into the fold. And I with this book, I just really wanted to tell a story and think about what does a story sound like when it's a story that takes generations to tell, or generations to reach the end. And one of the things that we do in the book is that we're traveling back to Colombia to do a disinterment, to do a desentierro, and that is also part of that. Even though Nono, by the time that we do the desentierro, ya hubiera estado muerto como 27 años, pero it's still present in our lives, and it's still present to us, and I think that that's a very different way of understanding the world.
Yo creo que es un concepto de conectividad que es muy, muy, muy latino. Se trata de familia y se trata de todas las conexiones que tuvo la familia y que tuvieron en el pasado y que los antepasados de los familiares tuvieron, y todo eso nos continúa como siendo parte de una corriente, which is very opposite to the Anglo-American image of the self-made man and the independent person, and you're totally on your own and you did it all yourself and you're not connected to anybody else. No, you're connected to everybody else, and all the people that came before them. So to me, it's very invigorating to read that, because it's this infinite, universal field of energy that you are tapped into and a part of. So I found the recycling, the going back again, the picking up on details from the past, to be very reassuring of a very Latine view of conexión con todos. That was one of the things that I loved the most about this book. I want to bring up something else. El título es sobre el hombre que movía las nubes, y la acción principal que buscan es el desentierro de ese hombre y de la vida de ese hombre. Pero para mí el libro no se trata de los hombres, se trata de las dos mujeres, tú y tu mamá, y la conexión entre las dos, el reflejo, el pensamiento, la interacción. I found this book to be a book of empowerment of women, but not done in a traditional or stereotypic way. Not done by showing a woman who was from the beginning very strong and standing up for, it wasn't just there, it developed, it bloomed. And I want to share one of my favorite parts in here, but there are throughout the book things that show women blooming. And this one is sobre las mujeres, las bisabuelas que se internaban en el círculo del agua, imaginando su propia transformación, les salían escamas, respiraban vapor. Si un hombre llegara a acercarse, se dirigían a él como si salieran del fuego, con una avidez dolorosa, para invitarlo a meterse a la laguna. Todo lo que había sido una fuente de riesgo para ellas en la tierra, su belleza, ternura, inteligencia, brillo, se convertía en portento de poder una vez en la laguna. Is this not a description of women's self-empowerment and transformation into turning the things that were considered risks and dangers into parts of their strength? You know, I mean, it was. I loved that that sense of female empowerment and that constant dynamic going between your mother and you.
Yeah.
You know, that's where to me the action is about. The title is El Hombre, and he's almost like a repository for family heritage, but the action in it and the progress that's made is between the two of you. I felt like he stood still and y'all moved forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I was just thinking of one of the things that I was thinking while writing the book was just wondering like what it means to come from women where like all the women in the family have been sexually assaulted. Like what does that mean? And then our heritage being, mestizo people, and how also that is a lot of women who were sexually assaulted. And I was thinking about all of that, and then in my family, like only the men being able to become curanderos and not the women, which is not, that's not what happens in other curandera traditions throughout the continent. So I was very curious about that, but about that rule, and very curious about my mother breaking that rule. So I think throughout, I was just looking for just the way that the women in my family are strong, but they're also very touched by violence, and they're very, wounded by it and imprisoned by it. And what does it look like when they get out of it, or when they, have like these small moments of rebellion? And we were talking about magical realism earlier, and then one of the things that I really loved about the section that you read when I was writing it, the idea of it, there's this old Muisca story about a lagoon, and there's like a woman at the middle of the lagoon, and the reason is that she was like the chief's wife, and she had an affair. And he made a meal for her made out of the sexual organs of her lover, and just kind of gave her that to eat. And once she found out what it was that she ate, then she drowned herself in the middle of this lagoon, and she just appeared over and over again in the lagoon. The Muisca people would say that she would appear and then give them messages, like she was still kind of like caring for her people. So that story in Bucaramanga, where my family is from, there would be all of these women. There would be stories about people walking through the woods and then seeing women appear at the middle of the lagoon, and so it's almost like the same story but adapted. And men and nono, like my grandfather, would be terrified if they saw a woman in the middle of the lagoon because they thought it was a spirit that was going to, drown them. And so my great grandmother and my grandmother knew that the men were afraid of this, and so they just hiked to lagoons and would get naked and then would just get in the middle of the lagoon, and if a man came by, they would be like, come here, and just kind of like talk like they were spirits. And so that is right, like that is real magical realism. It's like it's where there's a myth, and then myth becomes life, and then the life becomes myth. I think that's, and also like there's that, rebellion that is within it of women who are in very disempowered positions, finding a place to like live their lives fully while they're being denied living their lives fully everywhere else.
And the metaphor also reflects so much of the fear of the men of a population that a woman that is powerful enough to be drawing you into a lake is got to be terribly dangerous. The women have to be subjugated, because if they're not, they're going to kill us. And so this was it was a funny but very human, and at the same time very superhuman kind of story. It was, and there's many examples of that in there, where you find a little statement, a sentence, a response with someone that shows that transformation that's happening in a woman. The women are not invulnerable. They are wounded. They are human. They have been hurt. But they choose to take that human and invulnerable, and that human and vulnerable person, and to transform it into a person who claims her own power. So it's a beautiful, beautiful reflection.